All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Satisfying Software. Today I have Jacqui Read with me. She is a software consultant that supports companies in their architectural modernization journeys. She's also the author of Communication Patterns, a guide for developers and architects. Welcome, Jacqui.
Thank you very much for having me on, Gien.
All right. So, starting with communication patterns immediately, I want to ask you, what are some of the most common mistakes made when communicating design and architecture?
Well, there are quite a few of them because I managed to write a whole book about it, but quite a few of them tend to be in the sort of the visual area when people are trying to communicate via diagrams. And I think one of the biggest problems is that people try and put too much information into one diagram. You get these huge diagrams that you can't read anything on unless you actually kind of zoom in on part of it. And once you're zoomed in, you don't have the big picture, so you can't really understand what's going on properly. And I see a lot of these all over the place in open source software, but in companies as well. And there's just too much information on there. But then, ironically, there's quite often really important information left off, like there are no labels on the lines that connect things. So there's kind of too much information and not enough at the same time. One question I get asked quite a lot is, oh, we've got 300 microservices and I've put them all on one diagram, but I can't read them, they're too small. What should I do? And I say, why would you want a diagram with 300 or 1,000 microservices on it? What possible information can you get from that, apart from we have a lot of services? So why not have a list of all your services? So I always say to people that you need to create a diagram which actually answers a question. So who is your audience and what do they want to know? And so you need to create a view of all your information that answers a particular question. And maybe it answers one or two questions, but if you can't fit more really than that into one diagram. So it's always better to have multiple diagrams or multiple views so that people can understand what you're actually trying to say to them. There's no point in creating a diagram if people can't read it.
That's very true. Yeah, I also I always say to use levels of communication. Start high level. And then like with a tool like Miro, it's very simple as well. You have a frame, you start high level, and you can link to other frames if you want to dig deeper. And those frames can link to other frames to go deeper again. But I do think the most important thing you mentioned is, who are you doing this for? Um, because you have to swap methods or diagram
Yes.
styles.
Yes. Yeah, you've got people in business, like your, say, product owner, doesn't want to know about the security protocols and things like that. Whereas your security architects or anybody who's working in that area do. And so you don't want to confuse people or leave things out. So design for your audience.
Yeah. So which one? I'm not gonna. It's a, it's a silly question. I was going to ask you. I was going to say which one is your favorite. But seeing how we have, let's start with the who. So if we talk to non-technical people, what's your favorite and why do you use that one?
Well, for talking to non-technical people, again, you've got to just think, what do they want to know? Things like if you're showing a diagram of how your system is composed to, say, your product owner, they don't really care about all the technologies in there, like the particular database that you've chosen. But what they do care about is how well that database meets their needs. So they want to know like things like whether it's going to sort of be fast enough for what they want to do, because they want their software to be highly responsive, or they want to know that it's going to not cost so much that they're going to blow their budget. And so it's all about thinking, what do people actually want to know, and not trying to, as I said before, cram everything into just one diagram for everybody. It's a bit like the sort of one size fits all sort of socks. They don't, do they? they say they're a range of sizes, but what they really mean is they fit the people in the middle of those sizes. So you can't do a one size fits all diagram. It just doesn't work. But
No,
yeah, with the business, they're probably going to be a bit more focused on sort of the behavior diagrams and less on the structure. And the information they're going to be wanting is how does this meet the business's needs and objectives? And are we going to, is this going to take longer than we think or cost more than we think and things like that? So it's all about just thinking, what do people really want to know?
yeah. Diagram for your audience. I think that's one of the patterns you put in the book.
Yeah.
I think so far my favorite bit of your book is the styles of communication. You say you have to visualize. If you're showing a draft architecture or a draft design, you have to make it very clear that it is draft, and if it's finished or if it's the current state of things, you can show that by picking different things, and that's something I immediately started doing as well. Although Miro makes it difficult.
Yes. Yeah. Some tools are quite good for that, and they can show a sort of make it more sort of sketchy, or change the text into a font that's sort of a sort of handwritten font or something like that. But if you're really struggling, just put a big word draft right across, and then everyone knows. You can't miss
Yes.
that.
Yeah, no, I got excited and it was like I started experimenting, and like what I do now is sort of I don't use full lines anymore. If it's a draft, I sort of use the dotted or the dashed lines, and I put in a slightly gray background. And if you compare it to the hard one with the full lines and the colors, you sort of do get a bit of a different impression from it. It's not draft, it's not hand drawn, which would look better, but I think it's working.
Yeah, the classic take a photo of a whiteboard uh, approach.
Yeah. Um, so you also mentioned like the don't overdo it with colors.
Yeah, that's quite a fun one because sometimes you do get these diagrams which are just incredibly bright, or they've got sort of 17 different colours in them. And even if you put a key or a legend in there, it doesn't really help because people spend their whole time sort of looking between the key and the colours. And so the thing about only putting stuff in the diagram that you're trying to communicate can help with that because you can just get rid of a load of different things. But just reducing down those colours. I mean, you can have some bright colours in there. Another thing I talk about in the book is thinking about accessibility and things like colour blindness. And so you don't want to just have just pastel colours in your diagram because otherwise people probably can't tell the difference between them. You need sort of the different sort of light and dark colours. So yes, you can have some bright ones in there. But one thing I'd say to people is actually maybe you don't even need colour at all. You could just do a black and white diagram. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's quite handy if you're then presenting that diagram and you want to highlight something on that diagram. If you make that box yellow or whatever colour, people see instantly what you're talking about because there's no other colour actually in that diagram. So it can be quite effective to just really either minimize the colors or, as I say, just take them out unless you're actually highlighting something.
Yeah, a friend of mine is colorblind, so when it comes to my slides, when I do talks and stuff like that, I sort of got that message rather early in my career, like it has to work, even if it's black and white. So I always put them through something that turns it and then checks if it works for the different types of those. Yeah, so never just sort of what I took away from it is, and I don't know if that's the right message, but never communicate anything just via color. There
Yes.
has to be, yeah, other ways, like change your shape or use the different types of lines like dots and things like that, or go for round corners if it's meant to be something else. But don't just use color to communicate something.
Yes, with slides, when I'm communicating these different patterns and anti-patterns, they're actually all black and white, and I use ticks and crosses to communicate whether they're a pattern or an anti-pattern. Whereas I've seen a lot of people use, say, a green and a red border to show things that are correct and incorrect, and I think, oh, that's not going to work. Especially as they're normally the same sort of luminosity as well. So, like a dark green and a dark red, you think, oh, okay. People can't understand that. So,
Yeah. And the next thing that I thought was absolutely fantastic about the book is that it just not only talks about written communication or um, visual communication, but also, you talk about writing, and you talk about nonverbal and verbal communication. So it really sort of goes over the entire line of communication there, and I love that about it, because um one thing you said is that you have to simplify your language, because of because native and the non-native speakers, especially in our industry, we talk English and we've gotten so used to it. But you're native English, right?
yes. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm from the UK, so
You're lucky.
yeah.
I had to do it the hard way. By practicing a lot. And
Yes.
I'm sufficient, right? I'm fluent, but I'm not native, and I know that I'm not native because there's a lot of words that I still don't understand, or that I keep forgetting because you don't use them that often. So I love that advice to simplify your language. Um, I also
Yeah, and
think yeah, go ahead.
it's not just for sort of people who aren't native speakers either. It's also for anybody who just doesn't have a particularly large vocabulary, or it might be that someone is, say, on the autistic spectrum, and so if you say things in a certain way, like you use sarcasm or things like that, some people will just not understand that sarcasm, and so it's important to kind of think about all of your audience. People may not understand it, and it makes it so much easier for everybody if you simplify things, because what you're trying to do is get people to understand what you're trying to communicate, and so if they're using less brain power to understand, they're much more likely to understand what you're trying to communicate. Whereas if you make them work hard, then they're probably just not going to bother. They won't bother going and looking up that word, what it really means, and things can go quite badly wrong if people don't understand what you're trying to communicate to them.
Haven't we all been in that type of situation before?
Oh yes.
Yeah, no, I agree. As an autistic person, like, I'm quite okay with getting sarcasm and that, but I do have some problems with it, and for me, it's not that I won't bother, but it's the anxiety that it causes, because I'm very much aware that I'm not getting what they're trying to tell me. Maybe that's so that's a burden, and it causes so much stress and anxiety if you're in that position. So to simplify your language, I thought that was great advice there.
Yeah, it's actually one good thing about online meetings, I discovered, is that when people are sitting in a meeting in person and they don't understand something, or they don't understand an acronym, which is another thing I talk about in the book, of making sure that you define your acronyms. But if people don't know what it is, and it's a meeting in person, they are probably not going to ask because they don't want to look stupid. But they shouldn't feel that way. They should, but they're less likely in person. But if you're online, you can just ask in the chat. You can say, what does this mean? And you don't have to interrupt the flow of the meeting, but someone will go, oh, that means so and so. And the really funny thing is when someone goes, no, it doesn't. That means that. You can uncover some funny things there. But Yes, if you're using acronyms, define them.
Definitely. Like if you're in a Zoom meeting, I use the chat if I don't know with my clients, and there are a lot of acronyms that at first that I have no clue what they are. But even in written text, like we're having this whole either they have this document and I have to comment on it, and they use the acronyms, and no matter how I search, I can't find what it stands for. And even like if you do something like Confluence, it's like you can't really do what you're supposed to do because you're not getting the acronyms, but at the same time to just write a comment and say, could you please explain this acronym for me? And then you just have to wait to do your job. It's very, very annoying.
Yeah, it breaks up the flow. And of course, even if you do manage to find a definition of that acronym somewhere else, you can't really trust that it's the same one because it might need something different in another part of the organization.
That's true. Yeah. That's also something I, after reading the book, I actively started doing, is making sure that on the boards, on the architecture drawings that we're making with the client, that at somewhere it actually says what the acronym means.
Yeah,
And
I
I
try
learned
and
a
do it on
lot. Yeah.
slides as well. If I'm speaking, I try and make sure that it's put, say, in the corner of the slide for anyone who doesn't understand it.
That's great. I have not thought about that. I'm going to take that with me as well in my slides. That's it. And you called it acronym hell, I think, in your book.
But yeah, because it is.
What's the worst acronym you've ever come across?
I can't think of any definite specific ones, but I know that like especially in government organisations, you get some really good acronyms. You get loads and loads of them. And someone once told me that actually the shorter the acronym, the more important the project because they were allowed to have a shorter acronym on it. And but yes, particularly government organisations and larger businesses, the ones that have got sort of over 100,000 people, you get so many acronyms in there, and people quite often have them kind of in their job title, and you think, oh, what does that mean? And someone says, oh, that's because they work in finance. I'm like, oh, okay. Fine.
No one
Yeah,
does it says finance in this acronym, actually.
yeah. It doesn't even have the letter F in it. You think, okay, fine.
It's great. Yeah. Yeah, and the thing you also touch on is verbal communication, which although visual communication is hard, written communication is hard. I think like verbal communication is the hardest of them all, is my opinion.
Yeah, it definitely
um,
can be.
yeah. And so one of the things that I struggled with and still sometimes struggle with is to have my opinion heard or to persuade people to what I believe is the right course of action. Yeah. And in the book, you mentioned the rhetoric triangle, that it needs to be present there.
Yes, it's quite interesting that I end up talking about Aristotle, sort of two and a half thousand years kind of later. His stuff is still relevant, and yeah, we're talking about balancing all the different things because there's no point in making sure is in kind of giving people lots of data if they don't trust you because they won't they won't trust that data. Whereas if you've built up that trust and then you tell them something, you back it up with data, then you're making sure that people will kind of well, they're much more likely to accept your message. So you're not so much persuading people as showing people that they can trust you. And the other aspect of that is kind of getting people to listen to you. So not sort of being that sort of very dull person who goes on and on and on about things, and so it's balancing all these different things. But yeah, that was very interesting to write about something that is so old uh, when we are creating software.
Yeah, I love the fact that it had emotion in there because in the software industry, I get you get a lot of software developers that go like, "I am persuaded by facts," um, but then if you ask why they like Kubernetes so much, it were not facts that persuaded them.
Yeah, but some people are persuaded more by, but in different ways as well. So some people are persuaded more by emotional things, and some people are persuaded a bit more by facts. Everybody's different. But if you do get that balance, then you're much more likely to be able to get your message across to people because they'll actually listen to you and they'll trust what you say.
One thing I said already a few times, and mostly because in the beginning of my career, that was my approach because I was not very good at communication. This is 10 or 20 books in on how to communicate better. So this is the version that sort of works. I said that you don't have to be the one to persuade people. You don't, even though it's your idea, step aside from ego because you want the credit if it's a good idea, but if you really care that this is the way forward with the architecture, if that is the way we should, you know, divide stuff into microservices, like, you might not be the person to persuade someone or anyone else in your company, and hand it over to someone who agrees with you and is actually really good at it, um, to do that.
Yeah, another thing you can try and do is get people to come to their own conclusions with things. Because if you show them all the things that have brought you to that conclusion, and then they come to the same conclusion, then they're going to go, "Oh, well, that's what we should do then." And you go, "Oh, what a good idea."
You're doing
Oh,
very
look,
well.
I'll have the plan ready by the end of tomorrow. It's already done.
Actually, already the email is scheduled to send out tomorrow morning.
Yeah,
It is. It does take a lot more time. If you sort of have to get people, get them there by themselves, it takes more time to do that. But that is also, I think, it's some good advice to get them there at the very least.
yeah, definitely.
But yes, and sometimes no matter what you say, you know that it just won't happen, and then you have to let go, I think, because
Yeah.
of emotions.
We can't win all the time.
No. Besides, there's not the solution, there's a solution. Um,
Very true.
and we're always, yeah, more attached to our own, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when it comes to sort of communicating, um, maybe visual mostly, or maybe even simplify your language. How do you think AI will help us with that?
Oh, AI is a bit of a thorny thing at the moment because it's changing so much. And I know a lot of people are using it in lots of different ways, like even to help them kind of with their writing. People are creating sort of bots that will just do things like go through their writing and check it for grammar, or ones that will go through it and find all the references for them and find those links to those references. And so things like that, where you are kind of um, taking that sort of less skilled aspect of your communication and giving it to AI, I think those are probably quite a useful thing to use it for. And I think if you're generating ideas, like what's some other ways I could say this, things like that, then I think it's useful in that way. But I don't think it's ever going to completely replace um, like human communication, because it just, I mean, it's got a lot better, but it just can't it's not human. It can't get all the nuances of communication. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of humans aren't very good at communicating. So how can AI be good at communicating? Because it's learning from humans. Um, think of all the sort of the bad code that has been consumed into AIs that it's now spitting out. So we're teaching these LLMs. So it's only probably ever going to be as good as us, and if we're not that good, then they can't work it out. But I think yes, there are things that it can help us with, like especially if you're trying to write in a non-native language as well, because you can write something that's grammatically correct in another language, but actually doesn't really sound right to a native speaker. And so I think AI is probably going to help with that because it's going to understand, it's going to be able to recognize these patterns and go, oh, actually, if you reorder this sentence, that's probably a good way around it. So yeah, I think it's useful, but it's not ever going to replace the human writer. We can definitely tell the difference, I think, between something that's been written by an LLM and something that's been written by a human at the moment. Although lots of educational institutions want AI to now tell them whether something's been written by AI, and there was a professor in Texas, I think it was, who basically gave pretty much all of his class at a university a zero because he'd asked ChatGPT if it had written their papers, and ChatGPT had said yes, but it was lying.
He did not know about hallucinations.
Yeah.
Did
Yes.
you
So
write it?
we need
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
very wary.
Oh, that's so funny. Oh, yeah. I remember the whole they pointing to research papers that don't exist sort of thing that came out of the AI as well. It's doing its job. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
Yeah,
Um,
it's trying its best to answer the question for you, and it's trying so hard that it would just make stuff up. Uh, so yeah, I never trust it. Always check.
yeah, definitely. Yes. So it written and verbal and simplifying. Do you think it would be able to help with visualizing diagrams?
So I actually run a course on this at the moment. It's diagrams as code with AI, and it's quite interesting what the LLMs can do now. So if the main way that we can do things visually with an LLM is via text. So diagrams as code can be really useful. So things like ChatGPT are fairly good with things like Plant UML and Mermaid, even starting to be get better with things like Structurizer, which is for C4. And it can do at least fairly basic things without you having much understanding. But kind of the main part of my course is actually we really do need to understand what the LLM is giving us in order for us to be able to validate what it gives us. But also we need to know how to ask. So if that is one example where I give it a diagram and ask it to reorder the elements so that certain things are on the right instead of the left. And I think ChatGPT came back to me and said, "Oh, I can use this little arrow thing and it will move it over for you." And it doesn't. It just completely made that up. And so I said, "Can you reorder the elements in the diagram so that these two appear on the right?" And then it could do it. So you have to know that you need to change the order to do it. So it's quite useful in that if you think, oh, this is going to take me ages to copy and paste and move all this text around, but I know what I want to do, and therefore you can tell it and you can see that it's done it. Um, but if you don't know what you need to do, it might not work very well.
As it's with most things
Yes,
in
but
life.
with that, but things like ChatGPT, and I think Claude can actually take a picture now, and so you can give it a diagram and ask it to turn it into like Plant UML or something. But I mean, it's not. completely accurate, but it can at least give you a starter. And so that's only really in the last sort of few months been able to do that kind of thing. So it's over the last couple of years, it's changed an awful lot from not knowing at all to being able to actually take an image and help you with it.
That's great. Yeah, so we will be able to do it faster, but not trust them completely to do it for us.
Yeah, we need to have that knowledge. You can't just get anyone off the street to come and do, do your diagrams. They need to know what they're talking about.
Yeah, you can't give it to your kid.
Yeah, or your cat.
Well, I don't think my cat could. Well, she can use a computer if she walks over the keyboard.
Yeah.
All right. So this next question is a section that we have called Rant Away, and what are some of the problems that you still see with communicating architecture?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I see at the moment is to do with the software design kind of part of the development process. And I keep seeing these design activities being sort of skipped or forgotten because the way productivity and progress seem to be measured with software is how much code's been written or how many deployments there have been and what's in production, that kind of thing. And if we skip that kind of design of that software product, we don't actually understand what our software product really needs to do. And so you're going to end up with something that doesn't meet the user needs or the business needs. And either that thing that doesn't meet those needs, that's either going to end up in production anyway, which we really don't want, or there's going to be big delays when you're sort of redoing everything because we didn't quite understand it, or maybe it gets completely scrapped and you've just wasted all that time and money. And even when these design processes are actually done, when people really think about what this software needs to do, they tend to be done by business people and then they're kind of thrown over the wall to the technical teams to implement. And the technical teams really want to implement like modularized software that they want to be able to like encapsulate the complexity within things and make the whole system more simple. Um, but if you want to do that, you need your design to also have those modules in it. And the business just doesn't have any reason to design like that unless they get input from technical people. And so we really need to make it so that business and technical are working on this together and at the very least have a very quick feedback cycle, even if they can't actually do it together. And they should be able to, really. But we need that collaboration with these design activities, because I read a little while ago that still we've got, I think, over 70% of sort of software projects are failing, either completely failing or sort of not meeting those needs. And so this kind of collaboration bit, I think, is the big thing that people are missing, that kind of feedback and iteration, because they go, oh, our delivery teams, they're agile, they're doing Scrum, but actually the rest of their whole design process, if they're doing the design, is waterfall. And so it just doesn't actually work. And the thing I've been working on recently is called the ACED model. So that's ACED. And it actually does stand for something. And it helps people, yeah. Um, it's the architecture, the context, the engineering, and the design. So it's not quite in the right order, but it does stand for something. But it helps people to understand kind of how design kind of fits in with the architecture and the engineering, and like with the whole context that we're working in as well. And we need to use all these together, not skip anything. It's not waterfall. It's iterative. It's actual proper agility rather than that just the sort of methods for things. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, software design is kind of my big bugbear at the moment. And of course, communicating all of this is kind of almost secondary to the idea of actually doing it in the first place.
Yeah, indeed. So, as a final question to this podcast, what does it mean when software is satisfying for you?
Software that is satisfying works. It meets expectations, and that's not just kind of the user expectations. It needs to meet the business expectations as well. And like as I was saying about design, you can't do that unless you understand and get those expectations and intents into your design. And then one of the really big things, of course, is the user experience. So even if something works, the actual experience that I have of being able to, say, click through from, if I go to a website and I look at a previous order, can I click through to an item and then reorder it? Some websites I can, some I can't. There's an application that I use for borrowing books from the library. And when I return a book, I get an email saying that my book has expired. But I returned it, it didn't expire. And it's really annoying. So it works, but it's annoying. So, yes, works, meets expectations, but also has that user experience. Very
All
important.
right. Yes. Thank you very much for joining me on the podcast. It was lovely to talk to you. And everyone else, I will see you in our next episode.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great.